Hello, I'm going to make a speech on land taxing and why it is important for developing countries for economic growth, stressed by a well-known economist Nicholas Caldor. The main principle on land tax are addressed in several main points by Voltaire in 1959. The first one, the economically optimum level of land taxation should be decided ultimately on the basis of the effects on the allocation and intensify of use of resources. The basic objective is to absorb by taxation that amount of purchasing power which can be diverted with economic advantage from private hands to government. The second one, the marginal impact of taxation on production and investment should be softened by providing exemptions which encourage anti-reclamation and improvements on the land. The third one, to the extent feasible, marginal producers should be tax-free. Otherwise, they will be prevented from becoming more efficient producers and they may even be forced out of production entirely. But when we look at in 1920s, we see that clearly in developing countries, most of the farmers are still marginal producers, and also in some countries they are tax-free. But this is a good thing for those countries. This is a discussing point, I think. The fourth one, tax differentials which favor certain types of agricultural production over other types should be avoided except when the differences in tax treatment are clearly in accordance with development objectives. The fifth one, taxes which fall more heavily on the portion of harvest that is marketed than on the portion retained on the farm may impact desirable transfers because of their tendency to discourage agricultural marketings. And when we look at the history, we see that in Ottoman Empire, this kind of tax discourage the small farmers from producing. The sixth one, taxes should be distributed so that low-income families are taxed lightly. If at all, to tax them relatively heavily would impinge upon their essential consumption requirements and magnify existing income inequalities. When we look at the situation nowadays, we see that in many developing countries, the tax imposed on smallholders rather than capitalist farmers, landowners. The last but not least, taxes should vary with changes in production and prices in order to contribute to the country's economic stability and to permit diverting part of the increasing income as the economy expands to development financing. There are some kind of taxes employed in countries. These are taxes based on land area, taxes based on rental value concept, taxes based on income concept, and taxes based on marketed produce. Land taxes sometimes could be useful tools in order to protect sustainability of the soils. If there is ignorance of land in developing countries, I'd like to specify my talk with the title based on yield tax. When we go back to before Republic of Turkey is established in 1923, we clearly see that farmers and peasants were not the owners of the land in Ottoman Empire. It is the state that was considered the owners of the land. So the state gave the right to save a part of land only as a fief to those who were successful in the wars. And the Sipahi, who was the owner of the Timar, gave the right to cultivate the land to the farmers and peasants with a title deed. The Sipahi, who was the owner of the Timar, would collect the teeth employed according to Islamic law and other taxes from the farmers and peasants themselves. Walt Haskell in 1959 stressed that the teeth, which is the oldest example of a tax assessed on the basis of gross harvest and gross income, is unusual among fiscal instruments. Although it is a rate of 10%, in principle, the tithe was frequently imposed at substantially higher rates. In Muslim countries, a rate higher than 10% has generally been the rule. Adherence to the principle of a proportional rate, however, seems always have been a silent characteristic of the tithe. After Ottoman Empire was collapsed, some countries like Turkey abolished the tithe. When Nicholas Calder, who visited Turkey at the beginning of planning period, strongly suggested that the land should be taxed in Turkey. Some countries such as Syria and a property tax is fixed in 1925 in accordance with the returns under the tithe in the preceding 4 years, and the village, not the individual, was continued as an assessment unit. In Saudi Arabia, the government collects this tax from all Muslims at a rate of either 5% or 10% of gross income, depending upon the method of irrigation. In Morocco, agricultural land is classified into 8 categories according to the productivity and taxed on the basis of gross output as shown in taxpayers' declarations. A uniform rate without considering income producing capacity of the land is considered as a primitive form of land. As a result, appropriate tax collections from land could be a powerful instrument for economic growth, especially when the government is interested in obtaining increased control over food distribution and food prices.